David was born and raised in Switzerland, but he then moved to 7 different countries on 3 continents. After having started a marketing agency and accumulated years of experience as a consultant, he's now working on growing the product Typewise, a smart and security keyboard app from Zurich. In this episode, he shares with us his personal experiences and learnings from running a tech startup. Hi, David. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks a lot. Hi, I'm very, very pleased to be part of your podcast.
Yeah, and you have told me that you have lived in 8 different countries. So I'm interested, what are countries you have lived in the past?
Yeah, I was very drawn to Asia for a big part of my life. So I did a high school exchange to Japan when I was 17. Through personal connections I made there, I then went to Thailand a bit later during my studies, and these experiences then kind of led me to not wanting to go back to Switzerland. So I spent some time in the Netherlands, did go back to Switzerland eventually to start my job. I've realized that in the end, as a graduate, it's always easier to find something back in your home country. But then left again to the US for a while. Then my career brought me to Germany, where I never really wanted to go. But then the career decided that for me. Spent some time in Mexico, where my wife's family is from. Then did a trip to Singapore for about a year. I mean, you know it much better than me, but a very nice place. It's a bit like the Europe of Asia. I would say. Now that we have a family, we then decided to move back to Switzerland, where I think there's a lot of convenience.
And then when you came back from the US or from Singapore, at that time, did you start your first business, the marketing agency, or have you already started before?
No, that was before. It was our company, iCoaching. And the way it came about was before actually moving to Bangkok. So that was during my bachelor studies. I was studying in Zurich, and I was working for an insurance company. With some sort of like freelance consultant salary as a student. So that allowed me to save up a lot of money, which I then splurged during my time abroad. My former boss there was like, yeah, you should create your own company and sell us this as your own service. So you could even like double or triple your hourly rate. And I was like, oh, that's great. So we tried it. We didn't get the project because they didn't want to do it at the end. But we somehow got in the mood of making our own company. And when I say we, it's an old high school friend, Janice, who's also now my current co-founder. And we did some IT projects already during high school, and like I think 1 or 2 websites we programmed. And then when I started my master's, so this first idea didn't play out, so we didn't get the service contract. But then during my master's in Rotterdam, some professor needed a website, and I think there was knowledge that I was doing websites before, and she approached me, and I sold it for just a few €100. It's a very, very small deal. Then there was already like a second person lining up, which was a bit of bigger things. I mean, still very tiny, but already like more than €1,000. And then there I also needed my co-founder because he was a bit more technical. And when I then returned to Switzerland, we decided to create like our own company. So we called it iCoaching. We said, look, we don't want to really be doing websites, but I think it's good to start doing something to, build a brand, get some clients. And this is what we knew what to do. And then I think it was basically through university marketplaces. So these online marketplaces where you can look for jobs or post jobs. There were a few like SMEs that posted website or social media jobs. and we just wrote them. And that was basically our first client base. And we did good jobs. And then the contract became bigger and bigger. But at the same time, I started full-time work that time at Schindler Elevator. So this was always like a part-time project to do on the side, which at some point it becomes hard to scale it up. Yeah. So we then started hiring part-time students who help doing the work. But especially when it comes to sales and business development, this is very hard to hire someone to do it, especially when you're still that small. And we never found, of all these employees, there was never somebody that said, hey, I want to partner with you and like a partner in this company. It was very hard to scale without our direct involvement. But that time, I think for me, the experience with a global, like being able to also then go abroad and work abroad, I think for me, that was always a higher priority than having my own agency, working with small companies and programming websites. So we always kept it as a side business.
Side hustle.
Yeah, but I think it was cool enough to have your own thing, your own show, that we never stopped doing it. Eventually, after 4 years, my co-founder, Janice, he then sent me on a Saturday afternoon, he sent me this very long email talking about the keyboard and saying that he has a better idea for how we can solve this 150-year-old pain that we use in our smartphones. And that he basically developed a new concept of how to design a keyboard for smartphones and replace the one that's made for typewriters. And that was then this transition period, how we then went from being a online marketing agency into building our own product. And eventually we stopped doing client work like a year later, and we handed it over to another agency and focused on the product. Yeah. And this was a bit the start of this whole venture that I'm doing now.
Yeah, I was about to ask you, how did you come up with this Typewise business idea? Were you working full time while starting this second company with your co-founder, or you're doing it like working part time, and then on the other 50% of the time you are working on this?
No, I had by that time I had moved into strategy consulting. So I started with a booze and company, just about to be acquired by PwC and turned into strategy. And I lived in Munich, then moved to Frankfurt. Yeah, it was just during that transition from Munich to Frankfurt where this whole idea started. We started with a prototype. So I was still involved in like evenings, maybe a half an hour call here, maybe on Saturdays, just when you have like the need for creative expression. Yeah. So this is the cool thing about a side hustle, is you can really do it when you want to do it. And there's no real obligation. Just very rarely you kind of have to do something and it's late at night, then it's annoying. But usually side hustles are very nice. The downside is that it moves forward very slowly for pretty much the same reason. Later in 2015, we then planned a Kickstarter crowdfunding campaign, evaluated the technical possibilities of this keyboard idea, which seemed to work on a basic level. And we then said we need to look at the market side. I remember we did this offsite in a Strasbourg in France, the two of us, and we had a designer friend to join us to like help with the visuals for this campaign. And when I traveled there, I still had last minute requests from my work, so you could already feel that the two things, they sometimes overlap, and it becomes very stressful. And we did the Kickstarter campaign, which worked out well for us. So we had a bit of funding, 15,000 Swiss francs at that time. And with this, we basically said, let's build like an app that we can then launch on the app stores to see if this really works. And in summer 2016, we launched it. I was on my last project just before I was about to embark on my MBA journey to Singapore. So then I had more time in Singapore to focus on it. But basically my learning was building an app takes a lot of product effort. I mean, in the end, you have to develop a product. And I think just putting in more business time only accelerates the business to a certain extent, but it's very theoretical. And if you can't back it up with progress on the product side to actually see the impact of your ideas, there's not much value to that time.
Yep.
So I think I've spent a lot of time during that year also talking to VCs, and it was my first time doing that, to kind of also understanding how do they look at this business. And I think by that time, so 2016, 2017, it was much too late to raise money with this, like, let's say with a simple app.
What do you mean by too late?
Like most people that are active in this ecosystem had realized that, let's say, only building an app does not translate into a business. So I think maybe 5 years earlier, you could have said, oh, I have an app, and everybody was like, oh, great, like, can I invest in Apple is going to buy you, and this is going to be super cool. And then, yeah, it was real. Like, people realized, okay, it doesn't mean anything. And there were many apps that have turned out not to work at all. There were many fads, apps that had millions of downloads one weekend, and then it was done.
Yeah.
So I think that learning had kicked in. So I think this needed much more thought than just, let's say, oh, we create another keyboard which is better. For us, that thought came a bit later. I think we didn't, this entire year, I think it was a big learning process to think about what is a tech company, what drives their business. And it's more than like just a front end product that you can see, but there's a lot of technology behind it. For me, that like I needed that, let's say, that year to also understand more about this entire industry.
So I mean, nowadays VC, they do not just invest in an app because it's not good enough. They look into the tech behind the app. That is the more valuable part. Is that what you mean?
Yes, I mean, it does. I mean, it can be technology. It could also be like a great brand, but then you need to have the great brand. And just saying I'm going to build a great brand is always very hard.
Yeah.
Right? But if you look at the successful apps now versus 10 years ago, back then it was maybe a torch app or a fake beer glass app that was suddenly downloaded millions of times. Because people tried it out. They were like, oh, cool. Look, I can drink a beer with my phone. And everybody had it. And it was gone again like a month later because there was no use to it. And how can you monetize this? No way, right? And I think that was just a learning that occurred over a period of time. So like the whole app ecosystem had changed. If I were to embark again on a journey like this, I would try to understand much more what I'm doing. So if I'm doing like apps, I would understand really how does the app ecosystem work.
But how would you go to try to understand this? What would you do?
Well, you can read books. So actually now I'm reading actually quite a few books, and I think I could have read them maybe 2-3 years ago.
Like what are the books you're reading now?
Now it's actually a funny title. It's called A $1 Billion App.
Okay.
It's very good. It's from the founder of Halo. They transitioned into the My Taxi app, which is called Free Now. It's owned by I think Mercedes and BMW. And he goes through the different stages of what is your prototype, and you raise your first round, and then it goes on and on and on until you're like like on a level like Instagram. But I think it just gives you a broader perspective. And I think we were very focused on our idea. And I think we found our way always by trying ourselves. And we obviously looked at others, but we never tried to understand, let's say, the app ecosystem as a whole at the beginning. And I think this knowledge is very crucial. It's the same if you want to do software as a service. I think it's great to understand more the bigger picture. I mean, that's what we do in strategy consulting. And maybe with hindsight, I could say that I was even working as a strategy consultant. Why didn't I do this more? And the reason is because it was a side hustle. It was fun. I didn't have the need to, I didn't have any pressure to make any money with this. I didn't even expect to make any money with this. This was just a good side idea. And we thought, oh yeah, let's launch the app and it will be fun. And then we saw, well, actually this works. Well, we should maybe try to make it bigger. But then you suddenly reach a point where, yeah, maybe you need investors, and then your entire story of a side hustle is not going to work.
Yeah.
I think even if you have a side hustle, I would approach it the same way as you approach, like a full responsibility project, because you would be more diligent about, like, is it good what I'm doing? Am I entering too late? Is the timing correct of what I'm doing? And not just is it a good idea? So I think this homework we did way, like, I don't want to say too late, because I think we're on a good track here. But we could have done the same thing earlier, and it wouldn't have harmed us. Yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned the books that you have read or you're reading. Is there anything else that you think might help you to gain the knowledge earlier?
What I've realized now, so that we're a team of 10 people, it's also very different than working only with a co-founder that you've known for years. So for us, the entire Scrum methodology has become very important. So I actually got a Scrum Master certificate before we started full time here. I don't think you need a certificate for this, but I think in general, it helps, like, having a clear methodology of how you organize your team. That's very important. So for me, like, the whole Scrum idea and all of the mechanics of it were very good. I'm now actually listening to, it's a book called Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time by Jeff Sutherland, I think. So he's, I think, one of the masters of Scrum I could recommend. And then I think it's a general staple of, like, Eric Ries and Peter Thiel and those, like, 0 to 1, those type of books. Like, some books usually help you, like, reflect on your idea. And, like, when you read that book, you always have your idea in mind, and you kind of play through how they play their ideas through. Yeah. Was always good, but I was always a guy that was very slow in reading books. So I know there are these people that read like one book per week. And I take a quarter to finish it. So
I mean, like you said, you had an idea in your mind, maybe your business, and when you're reading it, you try to take your business through maybe the methodology or the journey with the book. Of course, it would take some time. I mean, it's someone like me. I just read and observe the information. I do it very fast. It's different. And then and then now you have 10 team members. And then do you know that you need a Scrum Master, or you learn it from someone that this would help you to manage the team?
I was part of a pilot group that underwent, like, an agile training. So I think I was just lucky that I could do it maybe as part of my previous job. I might not have done it in a startup, because you're like, oh, it's a waste of time, and I have to, like, why should I do this? Yeah, I can, like, listen to a YouTube video for 30 minutes. I understood it, but yeah, maybe you didn't. I mean, maybe if you do, then that's great. But I think for me, it took a bit more time than 30 minutes to really, because you have to hear it like 20 times over. Because in the end, you have to apply it, like, super rigidly every day.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the power of Scrum, is this repetition and doing it the same way. And I think to be able to do that, you also need to get it hammered into your brain yourself. So.
And also there's a difference between understanding it and believing it.
Yeah.
Sometimes you learn something, you understand the concept, you understand this is correct, but you didn't really believe in it, because you have to really use it and experience it and then believing it.
That is very true. And I think because we were 20 consultants, usually managers or, like, principals, taking that course together. So there were a lot of critical questions. I mean, it meant doing your job differently the way I've done it for the past 5 or 10 years. But still having at the end 20 people that say this was great, I think also then for me gave me more confidence now also applying it in my own startup, knowing, maybe sometimes we think, is this sensible? Do we need this, like, this sprint planning every week? Isn't it a waste of time? Or this demo Friday on Friday, like, really? But having seen that 19 other people also were convinced, that gave me much more confidence to, like, stick with it. trying to find out, well, doesn't it work, or why do we I'm effective? Maybe we have to tweak it a bit. That gave me much more confidence than if you just read it somewhere.
Another app, or
And
if you would
then
start
one guy
Typewise
challenges
from
you
the
and you're
right
like, well,
beginning,
yeah,
what would
actually, I
you
also don't
do
know.
differently?
And then you may abandon things too early.
Yeah. And besides a Scrum Master, if you would start another app, or if you would start Typewise from the right beginning, what would you do differently?
Yeah, I would do much more user testing. We have had a user group from very, very early on. We didn't do systematic user testing. We did test certain things, and we obviously always were open for feedback. But we have now understood that, and it also depends what tools you use. But now there are tools like you can pay 10 users in a certain country, and then you give them a task and they record themselves with the screen, but you also see the actual user. And that's very powerful because, and maybe when you launch a new feature, you can just quickly test it. And it's very different from maybe giving it to your friends. You have to be very disciplined to not explain them anything when you sit next to them. It's very tempting to just say, oh, maybe press there.
Have you thought about clicking there?
Yeah, like let me show you. And with video recording, yeah, it's absolutely impossible. And you can do it with different cultures and see how does a guy from Brazil or from Bangladesh or from Germany, how like, is there a difference? I think we've recognized this possibility too late. We've often had feedback and we heard, oh yeah, maybe the onboarding is difficult. But then we always tried, the way we approached it was we get feedback and then we try to reproduce the issue so we can fix it. And we've obviously asked, can you send us a screenshot? Can you like record your screen? Eventually, that was like a new feature. But I think it was still too much. We tried to understand a single person, and if we couldn't reproduce it, then we were like, yeah, he did a mistake, which maybe he did. But if you see them doing the mistake, trying 5 times the same thing on a video, then you're like, okay, this can't be. Like, we have a problem with our app. We need to fix this step. Because if somebody's struggling like that, and if you see 5 people struggling like this, and really trying for minutes, do a simple step, you have to fix it.
Yeah.
And then, so I think these are new tools. Maybe they weren't, I don't know if they were available 5 years ago, like this, but now it's very easy to use these type of testing tools. I would encourage like everyone to test much more.
What are the ones you are using now, the testing tools?
I think it's Nomad, Task, like the one we're using.
Besides testing, what do you think are the challenges having a startup in Switzerland compared to in Singapore where you used to live, or in US you also used to live here?
For me, it's a bit hard to answer the US part. I mean, there I have not built my own startup, so it's only anecdotal stuff that I can mention. So one thing is in Switzerland, yes, there is money, but people are very risk averse. So I think you need often a working prototype. Often people want to see sales, like revenue. And again, that's not my own experience, but from what I hear from like Silicon Valley or the US in general, that often with an idea, you can raise like a seed round. And here in Switzerland, I think this is impossible. Yes, of course, if you're in like biotech or very high capex, high tech, even there, you would need to have a patent, or at least a patent pending. You would need to have like 3 PhDs from ETH working since 5 years on some crazy thing. And this all needs to be in place. Yeah? So it's not an idea. You have a technology, you just haven't built it. But even there, I think like investors in Switzerland, they're very risk averse. And for us, the challenge was now with our current business model is B2C. So we sell our app through the app stores. There's no past success from Switzerland doing this at a large scale. And we know it's hard. Yeah, probably most apps, they never reach this huge scale. So people are like, oh yeah, but that this becomes a huge company. You need like 10 million downloads, but this is yeah. So you need to be successful internationally. So this is very tough. So we only do B2B. I've heard this a lot of times. So for us, it was very like it took a long time to find the right investors that were also willing to like take on this risk and also go down that path. Whereas I would say in Singapore, at least this B2C issue you don't have. It's rather the opposite. I mean, you have a huge Southeast Asian market with like Indonesia and Malaysia and Thailand, and they're all growing.
There are
From
lots of C's there in terms of the
yeah,
face. The C is very
yeah,
big.
absolutely. Yeah. So I think there you could, I think all scalable consumer businesses, that's not a problem for a Singapore investor. Now, the other thing, I mean, that's for the money part. And I think the other thing you need for a startup are the right people. I think here you get very good technical people at the very advanced technical level. So I think with ETH or like EPFL, I think we have two very good universities. So I actually just spoke to a guy from Singapore today, and he's very interested in our technology because he also has a hard time finding good machine learning engineers. And we work with ETH, so we have three good people from there. So I think that shows here it's a very unique spot in terms of these type of talents. When it comes to software developers, again, I think it's very difficult to find people in Switzerland because it's a bit less advanced. So that means it's a very dry environment to find good developers. And the way I experienced a place like Singapore is that you have more like it's maybe a more liquid environment when it comes to software development. And then for Switzerland, what you have to do is then go abroad. That is maybe then the beauty of the EU. So it's very easy to do business across borders within the EU or certain related countries. But that means you have remote teams very quickly. We're such a small country and we lack certain expertise. The other expertise that we lack in Switzerland is in terms of marketing. So they're not Swiss people. I think it's very hard to find Swiss people here that have good marketing expertise. Usually they work in corporates. They do marketing for corporates. That means they're used to working with agencies, but doing it themselves, it's very unlikely. So either we bring in people that come from abroad that have gained this experience abroad and then come here, or we directly work with people from outside, so Berlin or Barcelona or London, Moscow, or if you really, I think, want the best people, you need to go to the US. And I think this is kind of a bit the challenge that we have, and then that results in remote teams. But I think there's also value in working together, especially when you're a new company. When you have new employees and if they're isolated, sitting alone somewhere, I guess in good times it's okay. But if you have tough times, it remains to be seen, also in our case, how it has an effect on like employee retention. What is their connection to the company if they've never really met anyone? Maybe they're more likely to leave than if you're a tightly knit team that always has lunch together and goes for dinners and drinks. I think that could be one of the challenges.
And also I find Switzerland is in a very unique situation because compared to Singapore, Switzerland has a much tighter visa process. And in Singapore, there are so many foreign talents. So even a startup need foreign talents, they could easily bring them to Singapore. But in Switzerland, there's this quota and it's a lengthy process to get someone, especially from third country nationals, to come to work in Switzerland. It's really difficult. And also, as you mentioned, people who work in Switzerland or Swiss people, like the salary is so high that it's so comfortable for people to get a corporate job here. Why people would venture out doing a startup, which they would not know if the startup still will be live in the market 5 years down the road. So all the things together, I find it's very challenging for startups to find the right people and to, yeah, just in general to find the right people or even bring the right people to the country.
I totally agree. And then what always puzzles me, like I had the same experience also, like tying it back in with your first question with going abroad, that very few people want to go. I mean, they like to go on vacation, but I've not really met anyone that really wants to leave.
Yeah, who really wants to move abroad, right? Just
Yeah.
vacation, but not move abroad. Yeah. And then for the audience who is interested in learning more about Typewise, you mentioned it's a keyboard app. Probably some of them could already find it in Apple Store or Google Play Store, right?
Yeah, you just type in Typewise and you can download it for free. So the idea is, why are we typing on a keyboard that was made for typewriters in the 19th century with small keys, and which doesn't really use also the benefits of touch screens? And why should we make a lot of mistakes? And then depending on which keyboard you use, often autocorrection also starts doing random things. Mostly also when you use like multiple languages at the same time, which more and more people do. And lastly, especially on Android, there has been an increasing problem of a lot of like keyboard apps that also record your data. They sell your data to advertising companies. They often have very intrusive ads, not even on the keyboard, but at other, like in just other moments, and you don't know it's from the keyboard app. But because the keyboard app is such a central piece to your phone, yeah, it's there on every single app. We believe it both, like, let's say, what we call intelligence. So it has to be smart, it has to understand what you want to say at this moment, but it also has to be secure at the same time, because you might type very sensitive stuff. And that's why we built Typewise. One thing you will see, or what you will notice, is that we've built a hexagon shaped layout. It looks a bit scary at first, but actually it's very similar in terms of the keys to the current QWERTY. But that way the keys are much larger. It reduces your typos just by the size of the keys. You can also switch to the original layout. We also implemented gestures of deleting and restoring text or capitalizing letters. So it's like it's just stuff you can do with a touch screen that you couldn't do with a mechanical keyboard. And we kind of use that. And then what we're now working on with our engineering school, ETH, is also what we've received a research grant from the Swiss government, is work on these text predictions. So the whole autocorrection, or like word completion or sentence completion, what we want to do in the future. That's what we find today, from our perspective, is still very rudimentary. So over the next 6-12 months, there will be a lot of improvements. And it's also something where we believe we can license this technology to other companies. So not in shape of a keyboard, but you could use it in other keyboards, or you could use it in also desktop software when you type text in like chat or like corporate messenger, stuff like Slack or Teams, email, and so forth, where just text entry becomes faster, becomes smoother, becomes more productive. And that's basically our bigger vision of, in the end, powering every interface between us humans and our digital devices with our text prediction technology.
I would really recommend all the audience just to give it a try. It is very interesting. It's a very unique keyboard that for your smartphone.
No, of course, and maybe like one thing I forgot to mention. It's also what we always talk about, MVPs, and launch quickly. When you launch a product in the app stores, users expect it to function perfectly.
Mm-hmm. You see
So
it as MVP. They don't see it as MVP.
yeah, so I think we have to think in terms of MVP, not as mature, maybe with less features. So that's fine. You can start with like one feature, but that feature has to work perfectly. And if competitors have more features that you don't have, you will quickly see which of those are essential, because your users will tell you, look, for example, with us, we didn't have these text predictions or like these words, like word suggestions at the beginning. And people said, oh, I like your idea, but I'm not going to use it until you have like word completion, because that's what I expect of a keyboard today. And that makes the entry barrier suddenly very high, because that's not a feature you develop in 2 days. And this can happen with any app. If you build a messenger app, they might already expect, yeah, you can do voice. And if you don't have voice, I'm not going to use your messenger app. If you don't have stickers and GIFs and all sorts of stuff, I'm not going to use it. If you can't do group chats, which suddenly becomes very complicated, you need a big infrastructure to do that. So it shows that the expectations for each app category has been set by some leading apps. And to break into that category, there maybe some features they're not relevant, but there's maybe a basic set of features, and maybe some of them are not that easy to just do. And if you don't have those features, people will not use you, because it has become a standard. And I think I think it's a huge entry barrier for any new app developer to like really get traction on the market.
Yeah. When there are more and more apps available in the market, the barrier is higher and higher, because users take it for granted. Like, I have to have this, it's basic.
Yeah, like why would I switch?
Yeah. Thank you so much for so much information, and I hope the audience would get a lot of values today. And if some of you wants to try out Typewise keyboards, just search Typewise in Google, Apple Store, and like Google Play Store. Yeah, thank you very much.
Cool. No, thank you. The pleasure is all mine.
If you like today's episode, make sure to subscribe, share, and like it. And see you in the next episode.